What's up guys, Xell here, and today I am going to be talking about Mihawk, which is the deck that I've been practicing for Nats. This video is brought in part by Endgame, where you can get sleeves 10% off using code Xell. And if you want to support the channel directly, you can also check out the Patreon, where you get bonus content and access to our Patreon only Discord. So let's talk about Mihawk. At this point in the meta, you probably already know what Mihawk does. It's very powerful and one of the top dogs going into nationals. However, I think what makes Mihawk particularly interesting is how flexible the deck list is and how you can adjust it based off of what you might expect to play. So first up, let's talk about the core of the deck. Of course, we've got Perona, which might be, I don't know, maybe the strongest green searcher in the game right now. The fact that it searches anything with slash, and the fact that it also finds green events just makes it very flexible and kind of the build around for Mihawk. Next, we have our premier 5-drop. We have the Tashigi, which is just basically a 5-cost AK most of the time. It also has KO and just removal protection, so a lot of decks find this very annoying to play into because one, the stats are insane on it, and two, is that it's not vulnerable to removal. Then we have sort of our first big guy of the deck. We have Shanks, the 7-cost 9k. This is basically one of the key components to why this deck does really well into decks like Emu, like go wide decks, because shrinking the whole board, it's like we got the 10 Shanks effect for 7 instead. And the fact that this can rest blockers out of the way, it's just very powerful card. So you'll see this at 3 or 4 copies depending on the deck list. And then of course we have the 9-cost Mihawk, which completes our sort of core 5, 7, 9 of the build. And this 9 Mihawk is again just really synergizes well with the leader ability, and also helps you filter cards into 2Ks, so it makes you very good defensively. And then kind of like the 7 Shanks, also helps you punch through defenses, which makes it very, very obnoxious. And then our last piece of the core is the Law and Beppos. And Law and Beppo is just an insane card that really synergizes well with the 7 Shanks and just makes it so that you're kind of like a BY Luffy, where sort of these normal 5k, 6k bodies kind of become irrelevant as you start dropping these Law and Beppos. The other added benefit of Law and Beppo is that it can stun a big thing. So it's like with Mihawk, now you have protection against things that go wide on you because you become a 7k leader and you've shrunk their board, but also you get kind of protection from things that are going tall against you because now you've stunned things. And the 2k choice for Mihawk is very, very variable. You can kind of use a lot of different cards in this spot. One of the most common 2ks is going to be the 4-cost Zoro, just because it is slash, it's Supernova, so it's like double searchable if you're playing the Supernova build, and in a pinch it can be a blocker, but generally speaking it's really just because it's double searchable. And then the other thing that leverages Mihawk's ability really well is the stage, which generally speaking you'll see 2 to 4 of in every deck list. Card is just very good because it is something that you can rest with your Mihawk ability and getting 3 Dawn back, but then it also refunds you the Dawn at the end of turn, so it helps you hold up for events or like Tashigi ability or whatever that you want. So just having an additional card that you can rest over and over is just really, really handy. And of course, why do you have this Dawn back? Well, you can use it for events defensively, like DMG, which is like maybe one of the best events ever. This allows you, again, just additional ways to punch through defenses. We also run events like the Supernova event. I know you're strong, so I'll go out from the very start, which acts as kind of like a mini Luna. And then you'll see other events in the deck like Billionfold World Trilicosm. This one's also very strong because it's basically a 1-cost 4k event, and then some restand events as well, which can be very handy depending on different situations. So this is kind of what I see as the core to Mihawk. It's not that it's these specific cards and ratios and whatever, but it's just like this is the foundation. We have Law and Beppo, 7-cost Shanks, Tashigi, and Perona as our core, and then we run some number of events, some 2Ks, and some number of stages. And beyond that, the deck can be extremely flexible from there. So let's talk about some of the different builds that have kind of become popular within the Mihawk base. So I'm going to start off with the one that I think kind of kicked everything off, which is the single searcher list. So the single searcher list is basically a style of Mihawk that I think has kind of fallen out of favor, but basically you only use the Perona as your only searcher, and you are leveraging just the raw sheer power of your cards to help get you through. So oftentimes you'll run many more 5-drops in the build, so Perona becomes very popular in this build, and you also play a lot more events, and basically you're just trying to raw dog what you draw, but basically anything you draw is going to be quite good, right? But obviously this highlights a couple of flaws within the build, which is that 1, you're not very consistent. 2 is that your even curve is a lot worse because, as you can see, basically everything outside of Law and Beppo is on your odd curve. So when you're forced to take second, it just drastically reduced the power of the deck. And for these reasons, I think this style of Mihawk has just kind of fallen out of favor. Instead, you'll see something that's a lot more common these days, which is the Supernova Mihawk, where you play the Supernova package, which includes cards like Kid and Killer. Kid and Killer is a Supernova searcher that also on your opponent's attack can restand Dawn, again synergizing well with all these events. Full Supernova build also likes to play these Bonnie searchers. So with Bonnie, with Kid and Killer, and Perona, you basically have a system of 3 searchers that help you boost the consistency of your deck. I also really like it in deck builds where searchers can find other searchers. So like this Perona can actually find your Kid and Killer. Your Kid and Killer can find other Kid and Killers, and your Bonnies can find the Kid and Killer and itself. All these searchers can find each other and like really helps you find all the necessary pieces that you need for the mid and late game. When you play the Supernova build, it also opens you for other 5 costs that are popular in this deck build, which is the 5-cost SEC blocker Bonnie. This is a card that looks a little awkward at first, but you realize that when you have stage and all these little searchers that actually on your 5 Dawn, it's not that difficult to get to that 8 rested cards breakpoint in order to trigger the Bonnie ability and get that draw filter. Mihawk is a deck that can brick up, and having this option of like filtering your hand is very strong. Another option is the 5-cost Stun Bonnie. The Stun Bonnie is Supernova, so it's very searchable within the Supernova package. Is a 5-drop, and Stunning Dawn is really good in this meta. Lots of people want to play things on curve, right? Basically all the yellow decks are very much focused on playing a 4-drop into a 6-drop into an 8-drop or 9-drop or whatever. And same thing with Mihawk. They're trying to play 5, 7, 9 on you, right? And how can you disrupt this? Well, that's where this card comes in. And so I think Bonnie is a very handy card and a really good piece in the current meta. And then the other upside of playing the Supernova package is getting access to one of my favorite cards in the format for Mihawk is the 6-drop Trafalgar Law. And this card is so absurd because generally it fixes a couple of things within the Mihawk weaknesses, right? So we talked about how in the single searcher build, you're very focused on the odd curve and your even curve suffers from that. However, we know that with the Supernova searchers, we're helping the consistency, but then also Trafalgar Law on 6 Dawn gives you a power play, right? You bounce one of the many searchers that you play, and then you get to play out a 5-drop. So you basically get 11 Dawn worth of characters out for 6, which is just insane. I really like this Supernova build because it directly challenges some of the Mihawk weaknesses that we talked about in the single searcher build. However, I also want to highlight a kind of hybrid build that I really have been liking and is the core of the deck that I've been running and practicing with. So recently in the Australia Nats, Cirrus Wang topped and got first place with his Mihawk build, and the list actually looks very wacky. The ratios look a little wacky. There's not a lot of 4-ofs. It's not like full on Supernova, but it's also not, you know, a single searcher build. So I kind of wanted to highlight this deck list a little bit because I think this deck list is very cool and again is the basis for the deck list that I'm going to be running at Nats. So the first thing you'll notice is that they don't play the Bonnie searcher, and instead they are fine with just 2 searchers within the Perona and the 3 Kid and Killers. And I like this choice because right now in the current meta, a lot of decks are playing, you know, small searcher bodies, which can challenge your Bonnies. Now, if this is a meta where that was a little less prevalent, I could see the Bonnie searchers being a little more useful. But when they're not getting attacked with like a 5k, 6k swing, like I feel like I'm kind of losing out value. And whereas Kid and Killer, gives you long-term value because you can crack it for an event and, you know, potentially block a 7k attack or something like that. So I think Kid and Killer right now is a better searcher than Body Searcher, which is kind of crazy to say. The other thing is that he has a high density of 5-drops, kind of like the single searcher builds, including the Tashikis. He's running 3 of the Pironas and 3 of the stun Bonnies. So he's kind of like skirted the line here and sort of hybridized what he's doing here in the build. And I really like these 5-cost Pironas because, you know, Mihawk is a deck that can get overrun in the mid game, and Pirona just gives you kind of a stopgap in those spots. And then I also really like the 5-cost Bonnies, like I talked about earlier. Right now, a lot of people are playing things on curve and very useful in a lot of spots. And then he's gone up to 3 6-cost Laws. And again, I cannot just like stop singing the praises of this card. This card's really, really awesome. Helps in a lot of different situations. Again, lets you bounce back a searcher in order to go super wide on the board super fast. And then you get to reuse the searchers on future turns. And so I think that's just very, very powerful. The other thing I like about the Law right now is that in the mirror, because a lot of people are playing the Supernova package, like everyone is trying to stun you off your 7 Dawn. When your 7th Dawn gets, gets stunned, you can't play the 7 Shanks, which is kind of the normal progression of Mihawk. And so Law gives you another kind of like backup plan to your 7 Shanks. And I think this is really important because a lot of decks are teching in hate for Mihawk, and it comes in the form of cards like Sables or Red Rock. And so having this backup of Law helps you combat that. And instead of trying to fight people by going tall, you instead play kind of this like small ball style of Mihawk, which I've been enjoying a lot. The other cards that he's brought in are sort of tech cards. We have the 9 Shanks, which is just, again, very useful for other big bodies that you want to KO. And then he's brought in kind of a weird gamut of 2Ks in the Apu and the Kikunojo, which are, you know, searchable by either of the searchers, but they also have some unique effects that I think are really nice. Like I really like the Kikunojo because when you don't have stage, it kind of serves as a stage. And then in the Emu matchup, it's very annoying because it can swing 5 over and over again after you use leader ability. And then the Apu is also really nice because, you know, we talked about how everyone's got these small bodies. Well, Apu lets you just directly deal with them, and it lets you rest your own guys a little bit easier without them getting attacked into, which is actually very, very annoying for Mihawk. I also want to talk specifically about the event package that he ran. So he's currently running 9 events, and he is only running 7 2Ks in his build, but he kind of uses Paradise Waterfall as the 8th 2K. With Paradise Waterfall and Spiderweb, the reason why these cards are so good is, one, they punish your opponents for being too greedy with cards like Round Table. So like very frequently people will play something like Gamma Knife, Round Table, etc. to reduce the power on your big guys when they get rested with your leader ability. And if they swing with a searcher or something too small, well, Paradise Waterfall restands them, and they basically just lose out on the ability to clear your big guys. On top of that, it also has additional utility in the mirror. So very frequently, the Law Beppo loop, you play it, you stun their big guy, your leader becomes a 7K, and then you swing and you swing through it, right? But these cards make it really, really awkward because if you stun their big guy and then you attack and then they Paradise Waterfall, counter your attack, and then restand the guy you just tried to stun, well, it's like you kind of never played the Law and Beppo, and that can actually just be straight up game losing and something that people have to play around. So I really, really like this card. Dead Man's Game, I already talked about, but again, is probably the best event and just helps you provide that like last bit of oomph to finish off games. We also have this event, again, just the mid game is very, very important and a vulnerable spot for the deck. And having kind of this mini Luna plus the Pironas helps you survive. And then we have, again, Trillicosm, which is just a 1-cost 4K event. So very, very powerful. And it's nice that, like, for example, the Mini Luna event is double searchable, and the rest of the events are searchable off of Pirona. So all these things are quite nice and gives you a lot of defense because, again, at the end of the game, you want these events to survive the really, really big hits. So this is the build that Cirrus Wang chose, and I really agree with his choices, man. So if you're looking for a Mihawk build, this is the one that I've been testing and the one that I have really found myself liking a lot. That said, there are even more Mihawks. So we've talked about the single searcher build, we've talked about the full triple searcher Supernova build, talked about this sort of hybrid build, and there's other builds that people are exploring, like the Wano build. Now, I don't have the Wano cards on me, so I'm just going to talk about them, but the Wano build trades in the Supernova package for Wano cards. Cards like the Otama, which is a 2K, but also a searcher, and Momonosuke, which is another tap searcher. And then you get access to a card called You Can Be My Samurai. And this card is what turbocharges everything, right? Because now when you rest things, you draw 2 cards, and it fixes one key component to the deck, which is that it doesn't really have access to card draw. And so having that lets you kind of fix your consistency because you'll see more cards and you have this searchable pile. And then on top of that, you have a lot of good Wano cards that are searchable, namely your 2Ks and cards like Paradise Waterfall. So I think it's a very interesting build. It's kind of like a mix between the single searcher build and like a hybrid build, because you're not really searching your like top end pieces outside of the Perona, and you are trading in some of your mid game power with like no Peronas and stuff like that. You're a little bit weaker, I think, in the mid game, but you're trying to make up for that for the raw card draw that you'll get over the course of the game. I'm not sure, I haven't tested this build yet, but I think it does highlight some weaknesses from some of the other builds. There's so many decks right now that are playing small searchers alongside, and they just will swing into it. And then the worst case scenario is you draw these I Am Your Samurai, but you don't have things that you want to rest with it. So those type of things can get kind of awkward. So I kind of don't like that build. It's also very all in on your top end, where you kind of have to just play into whatever hate people bring. Again, we live in an era where people are bringing 3 to 4 red rocks in their decks, or sables, or round tables, and all these other hate cards for Mihawk specifically. And I think even though you're drawing all these cards, if you keep losing bodies, like your opponent is just gaining tempo on you, and especially because your mid game is a little bit weaker in that build, I just think that it can be a little bit tricky for you to overcome. The last build I want to talk about is one that I thought was kind of interesting, especially with the rise of yellow decks, which is the 8-cost Kid. Of course, because we are a green deck and we're playing Supernova package, we have to take a look at the guy. I mean, this guy is one of the best build arounds in green, of course, and let's talk about it. So 8-cost Kid is a card that, you know, requires a lot of cards to go along with it. So again, we live in a red rock world, so we have to bring in cards like Tashigi in order to protect it. But not only do we want to protect it with Tashigi, we also need blockers. So cards like Killer are great, because the one attached on means that you get to block and draw. You can even play cards like Bartolomeo from, I think, OP07. And that card says whenever you rest it, rest a card with your effect, you get to draw and trash a card. So it gives you a little bit of filter. So there are reasons why I think 8-cost Kid could be a really interesting option to bring into your Mihawk build. So there are some things that I really dislike about the 8-cost Kid build, which is why I think I have second thoughts about running it. It polarizes a lot of your matchups. So it is insanely good into decks like Moria or the new ST29 Luffy, decks that just kind of don't have a good answer to Kid. However, every other deck is packing heat for shrinking big guys, right? So let's think about this. In red, we have cards like Round Table, which are being used everywhere. Even Red Black Sabo is playing cards like Ein that just set the power to 0, and we cannot protect this card. We also have decks like Purple Dofi that brings in Divine Departure, which again makes this card incredibly hard to defend. Emu, one of the biggest, you know, monsters of the format, have access to Nusjuro, which shrink Kid and then make it easier for them to swing into. So with all of these kind of incidental hate pieces for Mihawk, I feel like Kid just plays into them even more. And it's not even great into all yellow decks, because like, for example, in Boa has access to Pudding, and normally with Kid you want to take all your life, get a fat hand, and then just protect the Kid. But in their case, they have access to Pudding, and so it kind of counteracts the sort of advantage you'd get with Kid. And I feel like in that spot, I would rather just play Law and Beppo, right? Law and Beppo kind of is like Kid, except that you can't really shrink the plus that you get off, you know, the Law and Beppo ability versus Kid, where people can target Kid specifically and deal with it. So, yeah, so I think these are sort of like the main sort of ideological pillars of Mihawk, and you know, depending on your locals meta or the tournaments that you go into, you can kind of tune the deck to how you want to play the deck and what makes sense in your meta. I think that's one of the reasons why I think this deck is so good, is because I think it's very flexible, and I think a lot of people, especially in the beginning, we're calling it red shanks, but I think it's quite a bit more nuanced than that, and I think the deck is very powerful. So anyways, I hope you guys kind of enjoyed my breakdown of the deck and its different builds. Let me know if there are other decks that you guys want me to do kind of a deck profile on, and I can do that as well. But other than that, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things. I appreciate it, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!